can a piano student still progress if they are not practicing at all? Today, we're talking about practice, or rather, lack thereof. If you hang out with piano teachers for any length of time, you will know that their number one complaint is, my students aren't practicing. So in this video, let's break down why this happens, what we should do as piano teachers when it does happen, and is it really as big a deal as we think it is? Be sure to stick around to the end. I'm going to give you a step-by-step process that you can do when you first notice that a student isn't practicing. So first, let's address the question of the day: to fire or not to fire? What I mean is, if a student isn't practicing at all or hardly at all, should they be kicked out of piano lessons by the teacher? I know everyone's going to have their own opinion about this. Some teachers are really lenient and will take anybody and would never let anyone go who wants to be there, while other teachers have strict policies and make people sign contracts, and if those promises are not met, then they're out. Personally, I have never fired a student in my 20 years of teaching, and anyone who wants to be there is welcome in my studio, and I see it as my own personal duty to make sure that that student still has a great experience, still falls in love with music and the piano, and still makes some progress. So how do we accomplish that? Before you can take any action or make any decisions about the student in question, you have to have an accurate picture of what is actually happening at home. And sometimes this can take a little while to figure out. Some students come in with their music completely prepared week after week. They're moving along, but they're actually not practicing. Then we have other students who are practicing diligently at home. They might be spending half an hour, 5 times a week at their piano, working so hard, and yet they're just a hamster spinning the wheel on their songs, not graduating them. And then there's everything in between. So the first thing you as a teacher need to do is figure out what exactly is happening at home. Communication is the key here, and it's great to have some way of the student communicating with you, how much they practiced, how often, how many minutes, what is happening at home, and then also to be in communication with the parents so you understand the piano setup at home, the practice routine. Are they helping them remember, or do they have to remember on their own? Is it a part of their family home dynamics? Piano practice is just interwoven into home life, or is it really foreign and they need some help with some strategies on incorporating practice into their weekly routines? These are all things that you're going to need to find out along the way. The younger the child, the more parent communication is needed. But for upper elementary, middle school, high school, and adults, I find that a little book, something like this, really helps for the communication to start between me and the student. I make it really clear to them that we have a goal for practice, but what I really want is their complete honesty. And if that means they write down, I practiced 2 minutes this week, then that is what I want. And I never give them a hard time for being completely honest with me. I really can't fully help them unless I have an honest picture of what's happening at home. And I make that really clear to them. This is not a grade. I am not your classroom teacher. You are not going to get in trouble. You will not be grounded. Just tell me how much you practiced, as little or as much as that might be. And that's a great starting place. So if I feel like I'm getting honest feedback from the student and or the parents on what exactly is happening at home, and I notice that there isn't practice happening at home, then here are the things I'm going to consider next. Number 1, did I make the practice expectations super clear at the beginning of this student's journey? Did I let the parents know that at-home practice is a thing for piano? Some parents might not understand this if they didn't take piano lessons themselves and they're expecting more of like the soccer practice experience. They might think, well, all of the progress happens at the weekly lesson. That's why I'm paying for them, right? And they might not understand exactly how important at-home practice is and how vital it is to the piano lesson and progression experience. So if they're not totally familiar with how this whole at-home practice thing works, then they might need some guidance. Just assume that everyone is going to need that guidance. Have like a whole new parent onboarding experience so that they know how to set up a good practice space at home and what is expected as far as at-home practice. And in addition to that, I ask myself, did I really make the practice expectations clear to the student, especially if they are a little bit older and taking more responsibility for themselves? Do they really know what's expected of them? Because if they don't know that clearly, then that's the starting point. The second thing I consider is this a temporary setback? Did they used to be consistent practicers and now it's dropped off? That's going to change how I approach the situation, because if they've never practiced, that's a different situation than if they have always practiced 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week, and now all of a sudden it's like one day for 5 minutes. This is a temporary setback. And we've all had that. If you remember back to your piano lesson experience, you had this happen to you too. I remember this happening to me in high school in a very real way. And I'm talking like about a 2 to 3 year span where I wasn't practicing very much at all. Now, if I could go back and talk to my old self, I would tell myself, hey, you're going to major in piano in college, so you should probably get your butt in gear those last 3 years of high school. But I didn't have that perspective at the time, and it was what it was. My teacher did not give up on me. And by continuing to go to the lessons, I kept that door open. I can't even imagine what would have happened if my teacher would have said, you're not practicing anymore, why don't you take a break? Or why don't you quit? When I didn't want to. Alternatively, she knew that I was still interested in piano and that I was still into it, so she kept her door open for me. And just by attending that weekly lesson, maybe I didn't grow so much in those 3 years, but I kept my head above water until I was ready to dive full force into piano, went to college, started practicing 5 hours a day, sleeping on the piano bench and eating dinner at the piano. That's another story. The third thing I'm going to consider is the student enjoying piano? Do they seem to enjoy lessons? Are they still excited about their songs? Or is it seeming like this is something they have been forced into? Again, this is going to change your strategy, because if they're really having a good time, the parents are okay with paying for it without the practice. They have other commitments and piano is just something on the side, but they are just having a good time. Then that's going to help determine what your next steps are. Okay, so let's say that you've done your best to communicate with the parents from the beginning of their journey, what is expected of practice, how to set up a good practice space at home, and the students know what's expected of them and are honestly communicating with you. Now you notice that they're not practicing. What do you do? If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button. It'll let me know to make more practice and piano teacher related videos in the future. So here's step 1. Give it a minute. Just give it a minute. Whatever a minute means in this case. So you be the judge, but give it a few weeks, give it a few months. In the case of me, I needed my teacher to give it a few years. If there isn't a major problem happening, no major conflicts, then just take it in before taking action. Step number 2. Okay, you've given it a minute and nothing has really changed. Step 2 is talk to the student. Don't make them feel bad. Just have an open and honest communication with them in the kindest, gentlest way possible. Find out what's going on in their life, have their routines changed, and then you can get a sense if they're still into this or not as well. So just talking to the student and just mentioning like, hey, you notice that we haven't really progressed through this book as quickly as we used to. I know that if you were to have more time to practice, we would probably move along a little bit quicker. Say it something like that. Definitely don't make them feel bad for not practicing, but just kind of in an inquisitive way and just gently mentioning the importance of practicing to them. So that's step 2. Along with step 2, step 3 is introduce some sort of fun incentive. So if you haven't done this already, then like this practice book where we are working towards goals every quarter of the year, every 13 weeks, they get a reward of their choosing if they meet their practice goals, something like that. I am also doing a practice challenge this summer with my students where they got this chart for the entire summer and they win prizes along the way, whatever works for your individual student. So at this point, we have given it a little time. We've talked to the student with a gentle reminder and we've introduced some sort of practice incentive, and we're still not seeing the practice happening despite our encouragement, our positivity, and our best efforts, things are not changing. Step 4 is we are going to talk to the parent at this point. If the student is older, then I would let them know, hey, I just wanted to have a little conversation with your mom or your dad, talk a little bit about at-home practice and how we're progressing along. It's nothing bad. It's not a conference or anything. Just wanted to mention that I'm going to be reaching out to them, just so they still feel like you're on their side. You're not going behind their back or over their heads with this situation. You don't want them to feel in trouble. Okay, so now we're going to talk to the parent and just get an idea and see where we're at. At this point, from the student and the parent, you're listening for clues that they are on their way out, possibly, that they are busy but still loving it, or that there's some other issue that you can help them with. If you've done all 4 of those steps and you've given it enough time in between all of the steps, you're getting positive vibes from the parents and the student. So there's still no practice happening, but you know that they're enjoying it and they are okay with the way that things are. Then step 5, it's your job to accept the situation. Accept that student for what they are going to be as a part of your studio. Accept their life and their busyness the way it is. Accept the slow progress along with them and find other strategies that work with students who don't practice. And we'll talk about that in a second. And just accept them fully. A gentle reminder, maybe a couple times a year, about are we ready to step up the practice is fine, but don't nag them week after week about it. If this is how it's going to be, then just accept that and just love them where they are. So now, if you have a student where you've accepted the fact that they're really not going to practice or they're going to practice very little, then use some different strategies with the curriculum you put together for them, the song selection, and how you structure the lesson with them. A student who is practicing heavily at home will have progressively more challenging pieces, probably a core 4-book method series, that they're working on, in addition to like big projects and really challenging pieces, competitions, recitals, that sort of thing. And you're going to expect that that student masters things at home and then brings it back to you for corrections, critiques, tweaks, and graduation of the piece onto the next one. So I want you to forget everything you know about the traditional I practice at home student. Wipe that slate clean. Now let's talk about how to best serve a student who really doesn't practice. So they are going to need less method books, less on their assignment plate, because it's just going to stress them out if they don't have time to practice it. We're not going to level up week after week like we would with the student mastering things at home. There's going to be a lot of lateral progression, and they are going to progress, but very slowly. We're going to find supplemental books, sheet music, projects that light them up, that are fun to work on together in the lesson, because that's going to be the bulk of their practice, is with you in the lesson. And we're just going to find one method book, one learning book that serves them best that you can work through together, and then maybe 1 or 2 song projects on the side. Nothing too challenging, nothing too big. And you're going to restructure the time with them, whether it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes. You could even do 60 minutes with a student who isn't practicing, because you're going to be practicing together. Now you're going to need some strategies to make that fun. You don't want a boring, let's do this over and over again type of practice session with the student. You still have to make the lessons fun, but there are ways that you can practice together and make that fun. Just don't choose pieces that are so challenging that is going to be like a frustrating practice session from week to week. Choose pieces that challenge them in one way, but in a lot of ways feel comfortable, so that they're not feeling like they're starting from complete scratch week after week. Another thing you could do is to propose to the parents that perhaps they see you twice a week, maybe once in person and once like a Zoom lesson, something like that. If they're really into piano, but the at-home practicing thing is just not happening for whatever reason, then they might go for that. And that can be a really great experience of you progressing with the student. You're just kind of holding their hand while they're practicing and progressing. If they're a super busy student and that's not why they're practicing, then this solution probably isn't going to work for them. But sometimes the busy sports student is used to all of the progression happening in practice. And so that sort of model actually makes a little bit more sense to them, and that's what they're used to. So just another idea. All right, I would love to keep talking to you about practice. Next, we're going to discuss exactly how much should a student be practicing to really progress. Once I get that video live, it's going right here, and I hope to see you there.